Right, we're gonna just take a minute while people are filtering in some technical problems. Thank you, everybody, for being patient while we work through all of that. We're thrilled to have you here, especially this is the first of Natalie's series. I'm trying to think, Natalie, are there 4? Did we do 4? Yeah.
We'll do 4. We can go longer if we need to.
Nurturing Creativity with Natalie. So you'll of course recognize Natalie from our Bellam conference and her talk on beauty there. So we're just really excited for this. These will be recorded and archived and stored. So no worries if you miss part of it. Just do what you've got to do. Natalie, I'm going to turn the time over to you and let you introduce yourself and anything else you want to say.
Wonderful. Well, just by way of quick introduction, if you don't know who I am at all, I am an artist. And that was a title that I was very slow to claim because I didn't think it was a great fit for me. And it took me a long time to be able to not only admit that I was an artist, but actually want to be an artist. And so this is what I'm sharing in this class today is a lot more and a lot deeper than what I was able to share at the conference about just the importance of beauty. I actually want to talk more about the principles that go into living a creative life, because I just feel like it's so important for all of the mothers here, because you are, as a mom, as a homeschooler, using well-educated heart principles, you are in every way a creator. And the principles that have helped me learn to become an artist are the same principles I think that can help you as well. So everything that I am sharing, this is the first time I've really tried to put all of these thoughts that I've been gathering for years and years and years. This is the first time where I'm really trying to get them organized so that they can be explained verbally. So if it's a little rough, I know you'll give me a little grace, and feel free to ask questions. We'll have some questions at the end. And I just hope that as I try really hard to put words to what I have been thinking and feeling and learning for the last 15 years, that it will make sense to you and be useful for you. So let's get started here. I'm going to share my screen for just a few slides, not all of them, but I'm going to start with just a second, let me get the share on. I'm going to start by talking about just the idea of creativity in general. And I'm going to give a story. I used to ride horses when I was little. And if any of you have been familiar with horses, this will sound really familiar to you. So my friends had these horses that sometimes we would ride regularly and sometimes we wouldn't. And they weren't really used to having a lot of handling. And so they were a little bit stubborn and they didn't always obey. So she would always give me the kind of mellow-ish one, but none of them were super mellow. And so we would go riding on this horse way out into the boonies. We lived in the foothills of Utah, and as soon as we would take them out, they would want to go home and we would have to like kick them and make them go away. And the funny thing is that when we were moving away from home, they would go super slow. They dragged their feet. They didn't want to leave. And we could go out for hours and it did not matter how long we were gone. The second that their nose pointed just even to the general direction of home, all of a sudden they would get super excited. And they would start running just as fast as they could. And it was really hard to control them. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with this verse of scripture, James 3:3. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Anybody who's ridden a horse that doesn't want to obey you knows that you actually can't turn about their whole body. You can see right here, this horse has a bit in her mouth, and the woman's holding her with a long line or lunge line. And you can see that, yes, the bit did work to turn his head, but his whole body is clearly moving the other direction. And we would have this same problem when we rode our horses home, because they wouldn't care that there was a ditch or a gully or a barbed wire fence in the way. They just wanted to beeline it straight home. And we would turn their heads, but I would have my horse's head, I would have his nose on my right knee, and he would still be going left. So it was really scary sometimes to try and get those horses to listen and obey. And yes, we could sort of get them to pay attention a little bit, but only if they wanted to. And so what would happen is we would have to use these huge, like we would just have to plan for really, really big circles. We would keep their nose right on your knee, and then they would just make these really wide circles. And that was the only way that we could avoid running into the fences. And of course, if you're doing a really, really big circle, eventually their nose starts to head away from home. And then they're like, oh, we don't get to go home. And they start to slow down again. So that was really the only way we could get them back under control. And so I feel like I learned everything that I needed to learn about life from working with these horses, because it really intimidating when you are on the back of an 1,800-pound animal that is thinking like a 2-year-old, and people think that bits control the horses, but they don't. And so you reach this point where you think, okay, I have to actually work with this animal. And this animal has to be willing to work with me, because I can't control him or her unless she wants to be working with me. And so I started to learn a lot about the training process of horses. And at first, you can work with a horse using their natural language. So horses react to visual cues. So like, for example, if I stare a horse in the eye, if I just stare them directly in the eye, they take that as a challenge. And if they are a nervous or a yielding horse, if they're kind of at the bottom of the pecking order and used to being at the bottom of the pecking order, they'll shy away from me looking at them in the eye. But if they're a really bold horse, they won't shy away at all. In fact, they'll take your challenge, and some of them might come rushing right at you. And being larger than you are, they will definitely win any kind of physical challenge that you take up against them. So it's really, really important to know where you're looking when you're training a horse and trying to work with them, because you've got to get to know that natural language. Once you know the language, you know where to look with your eyes, you know how to tip your shoulders, you know when to lean towards them, you know when to lean away from them. They start to realize that you can speak their language. And once they realize that, they start speaking back to you, and you can read them and they can read you. And it's such an amazing thing. It's like when I have a horse in a round pen, I can move them forward, I can turn them around, I can move them backwards, even if I don't know the horse very well, because they all have learned this horse language. It comes really easily to them. And if I can use that language with them, they can use that language with me, and we can get on the same page fairly quickly. Like within 30 minutes, I can usually have a horse following me around the ring. But everything counts. Every move that I make, every eye gesture I make, every shoulder tip I make, everything counts. But then something funny happens because we don't just want them to be natural wild horses. We actually want them to learn some cues. And everything flips on its head once you start actually instructing the horse to do something that you want it to do. You're no longer using their natural language. In fact, you're using language that is very, very opposite. So I'll give you an example. I had a horse once. It was a young horse, and so it hadn't had a lot of training yet. But he was still big. He was still really big. And I was in a stall with him, and I didn't pay attention to where I was. I had just kind of taken for granted that he was just standing there calmly. And he wasn't wild, he wasn't crazy. He was still calm, but he shifted his weight and he put his foot right on my foot, and it hurt so bad. Anybody who's been stepped on by a heavy horse knows that it hurts, even if you do have the right shoes on. And I could not move my shoes. And so instinctually, for me, it's instinct, right, to push his shoulder away. But he was young and he didn't know. And so pushing is actually a way to get a horse to move into you. So when I pushed him, an untrained horse, that is. So if you think of a horse out in the wild, if a lion is going to grab, jump on his back and grab him with his claws and bite him, if a horse runs away at that point, he is likely going to get more injuries, right? Like the claws of the animal are going to tear through his muscles, tear through his flesh. So it's actually better for a horse if a lion comes from, his left side or something and grabs him on the left. It's better for him to move into the lion and try and squish or crush the lion so that the lion will let go. That's his best bet. So it's instinctual and natural for a horse to move into pressure. So here I was pushing this young horse who hadn't learned yet to move away from pressure. I was pushing him away from me, and it had the opposite effect. So he actually leaned into me, and now he had me pinned against the stall wall, and he was still on my foot, and it hurt really bad. So it was not super exciting or fun, but I remembered, I knew what I had to do to get him off. I turned his head toward me, which forced his weight to shift to the other side. And I was able to get him to move. But again, I had to turn his head. I couldn't use the cue of pushing his shoulder and making him move away from me. So when you are riding, all the cues are pushing. And so you have to, like, if you squeeze his sides, he's got to go faster, sort of thing. Or if you squeeze him with your right leg, he needs to move away to the left side. So all of those things he has to be taught to move away from pressure instead of into pressure. And so again, it doesn't come naturally to him. And so you have to teach each individual cue just a little at a time. And you can't teach him with pain, or he'll begin to fear you and he won't want to work with you. You have to teach him just very gently and carefully. A lot of time what it looks like is you start with something that you can tap him with, like a whip. Like, people hear whip and they think like you're going to hurt a horse. You don't. You just tap him on the shoulder. Just tap, 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 and you're out of the way so that if he moves into it, he's not going to step on you. And you just tap, 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 and you just keep tapping. You just keep tapping, and you keep tapping, and he keeps moving towards you. He keeps moving towards you. He keeps thinking, what is this? He's doing everything he can to get away from this annoying tapping. And you just keep going, until he accidentally steps away from the tap. And then you stop and you praise him and you pet him and you love him and you tell him he did a great job. So he realizes, oh, something good happened because I moved away. And then pretty soon he starts to put two and two together, and he starts to learn that tapping means I move away, and then on you go. But every single cue, every single little thing that you teach that horse takes that much work from the beginning. Everything has to be taught. It doesn't come naturally. It's super slow and super careful and lots of repetition. So this is what happens when you do that really well, though. Number one, this is what happens with the natural language. You will gain the horse's trust if you know their natural language, and they will follow you any direction, any pace. I can get a horse to back up away from me I don't have to touch his lead rope at all. I can just back up and he'll back up. I'll go forward, he'll go forward. I'll start running, he'll run to keep up with me. And he'll keep his nose roughly at my shoulder. So it's a pretty cool thing, but again, like I mentioned before, it has its limits. He's still just kind of a horse. Yes, he'll follow me, but he's still being a horse. But what happens when you can teach a horse an instructed language is that he can begin to do things that he would never, ever, ever naturally do on his own. And he can reach a new limit, a new height that he just simply wouldn't know how to do unless you had taught him. And these cues when you're communicating with him, become completely invisible to people who are looking. So this is an example of a horse that has learned to follow. You can see the lead rope is super loose. It's not trying to run away. It's not trying to get away. Not only is the horse that she has in the halter following her at her shoulder, but you can see that the other horse out in the field is also following her, even though she doesn't even have a lead rope attached to him, because she has developed a rapport with the horses. They are following her willingly. So this next picture, though, is what can happen when you get a horse who is not only willing to follow, but also willing to lose all of your cues, or follow and listen to all of your cues. So I just want to show you how beautiful this is. Hopefully my sound will work. Let me know if Did you guys hear that? Let me come back. Whoops.
I couldn't hear it, but it looked great.
I hear it. Okay, let me try one more time really fast, because I don't know how to make it here. It'll be beautiful to watch when you can watch it with the music, because he is literally dancing. Just a second.
Natalie, I just put a cracker in my mouth, so it's hard to talk, but it's difficult to play a video like that without messing with some of your settings. So it may be.
Here, I took my everything out. We'll see if you can hear it this way. Just a second.
Okay.
Surely there's some tens coming out for that.
think I've got my audio a little messed up. Could you hear at that time? No? Okay. Well, maybe we just have to give it up. Well, he was dancing on the beat. That's the whole point. So it literally is a dance. So I just have a couple more slides and then we'll just chat. But what's fascinating about this to me is that it's just become this huge lifelong lesson to me, because it's one thing to trust, right? And to believe we're going in the right direction, but it's totally another issue to learn how to yield. And in the horse world, in horse training world, they talk about yielding like this. So there was a famous horse trainer. I used to read all his books when I was a kid, and he talked about how important it was for the horse to yield his jaw, because you saw the picture where the bit goes in the horse's mouth and you can turn that horse's nose all the way to your knee, but their neck is still really tense and they're still fighting. They're still fighting the bit. They have their teeth clenched. They're trying to fight you. They just can't because the bit is stronger than their actual mouth. But they're still fighting you. They haven't yielded. And when you get a horse to yield, to fully yield, their entire spine gets soft. The head gets soft. The neck gets soft. Their back gets soft. And as you ask them to turn and move away from your legs, their whole body responds to that. And even though it doesn't come naturally at first and has to be taught. So I just kind of wanted you to think for yourself for a second. You don't have to answer, but which one comes easier to you? Is it easier to just kind of trust and do what you're told because you trust the leader? Or is it easier to fully yield yourself to a process that seems confusing and unnatural, but you're still able to step forward? I think a lot of times in our community, I've heard Marlene mention that we listen to her and something inside us wakes up. Like we know that she has something to say, something about beauty and something about story and something about the arts. And we feel like in our hearts that it's something good. And I think we sense that, and it's instinctual, like it feels wonderful. We know she's onto something. And it's something that we want to follow, right? But then something happens to most of us, myself included, like, well, but what about math? And what about college? And what about a job? And what about curriculum? And what about, all the things? And I feel like we have done a really good job in the community of appealing to hearts. And I also want to give you a few tools to appeal to your mind and your worries, because we all have husbands who sometimes don't, not all of us, some of us have very supportive husbands, but I've heard a lot in the community when I read comments and things that, how do I get my husband on board? And I think a little bit of a mind argument for what Marlene is teaching is helpful. And I'm hoping that this little analogy that we have here will be at least the beginning of, or the start of that mind argument. And we'll talk more about it as we go through, but just how important it is to build the skills of creativity and how much our world needs that, how much the job market needs that, how much our universities need that. When we are teaching a heart-based skill of creativity, we are actually helping our children, their minds far more than we could help them otherwise. And I'm not saying don't do math, and Marlene's never said don't educate their minds either. But I want to make a logical and also a heart-based case for you and I becoming this kind of dancing horse, and allowing the person that leads us to be God himself. And when we can do that, then we can show our children how it is to be done. And that's the only way to do it, because like we often quote, Charlotte Mason always says that, true education is between a child's soul and God. And I can tell you that yielding to God has been my way of learning how to dance like this. Oh, so much of it has not been natural to me at all. And I've fought and argued with it. In fact, I laugh with my friends a lot that the surefire way of me knowing if something is actually revelation or my thoughts is if I find myself arguing with it. So I tend to want to have a logical argument to support everything that I do. And so I have spent a lot of time looking at the logical parts. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. But I want to share with you a couple of Greek words, because one Greek word, it's called diute, it says, hey, come follow. It means like, come hither, come here, come, come now. It just basically is like a command to stop what you're doing and come here. And we can see this a lot. I won't be able to show you this image, but I will pull it up for me to read to you. Just a second. Where did it go? There it is. So these are some of the scriptures that use this word come, like follow me. It's used come 12 times and one time as follow. But he said in Matthew, the Greek word is follow me. He saith unto them, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So that's when he said, come. And in Matthew 11, he says, come unto me, all you that are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So this is kind of what I consider the easy kind of following, just following. It's also used in other contexts, like when the husbands and, the parable, when the husbands saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir, come, let us kill him. So that come is that same root word, just come, like, come on, let's go now to go kill him. So it can be for good or for bad, but it's just basically like follow, do what I say. But then there's another kind of follow, and it's called akoluthe. Oh, I think I pronounced it wrong. Akolutheo. And it means to follow one who precedes, or to join him as his attendant or accompany him, to join one as a disciple, or to become or be his disciple. And most of these, the vast majority of these, when you look at the context of when this Greek word shows up over and over and over again. So when he told the fisher, like when he told Peter, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men, it said, and they straightway left their nets and followed him. And that's the second kind of follow, when they're actually becoming disciples. They want to copy his actions. They want to do what he does and become who he is. And so many more of those scriptures, I could go on and on, are just a deeper form of follow. The way that is used, it's not just a command to, hey, come follow me. It's a command to go something deeper, to really yield yourself. Like, for example, when he tells the rich young man to sell everything that he has and to follow him, it's a different kind, it's that deeper kind of follow. It's different than the ones he said to Peter and the other fishermen. So, it was a different invitation that he gave to the rich young man. So I really like these two kinds of follow, because to me, it demonstrates in scripture that there is a way to follow, and then there's a way to like really follow and really yield. And I feel like that's what I have been trying to learn. And in order to be a creative person, you have got to learn how to dance. And you've got to learn how to dance with God, because you can't be creative without him. You just simply can't. You will end up looking like every other horse in the pasture. It just is the way it is. And I know that the women are drawn to well-educated heart are not just other horses in the pasture. You women are not. I've met you. I see your hearts. It's just amazing what you want to create, what the vision that you have for your children in the homes. But sometimes it's a hard bridge. Just get new. I'm teaching a class, so you'll have to just remember. Thank you. So I wanted to share too, before I turn it over for questions, we're running up against the half hour here, but I want to just kind of go through super quickly. I've always been into, I mentioned at the conference that I've always been into business books, and I just have always read them. I don't know why I'm interested in them. Every time I read one, I'm like, this doesn't really apply to me as an artist, because I'm totally like just a self-employed artist. I can't duplicate myself. I still want to do my own art, and I want to do it my way. And I'm not really into making like a system out of it, because if it becomes a system, then it's not my art. But I still enjoy reading them. I don't know why. I just always have since I was little. But I've noticed a huge change from the business books that I read when I was in 12, 13 years old, and the business books that I read now. And I want to share this change because I used to read a book called The E-Myth. That was the first the very first business book I read, and it was inspiring because he basically talked about how to make a successful business, you have to make it really, really efficient. Your processes have to be efficient. Everything has to be refined down. You got to follow the McDonald's model, but you also have to give people that want to come to your business a certain feeling. So you don't just want to have it, you don't want to have it so refined that you lose a sense of meaning to what you're providing to the world. So I thought that was kind of a cool, interesting idea. But in his book, he does say this. He says he wants you to get the system so well honed down that you can hire the lowest possible level of skill. And he says, yes, I said the lowest possible level of skill, because if your model depends on highly skilled people, it's going to be impossible to replicate. And his idea is to help you like grow and expand. He says such people are at a premium in the marketplace. A legal firm ought to have lawyers, and a medical firm should hire doctors, but you don't need brilliant lawyers or doctors. What you need is the best system through which good lawyers and doctors can be leveraged to produce excellent results. But then just a little while ago, I read this book called Linchpin by Seth Godin. And he pulls this exact same quote out, and he says, this is what business books have been teaching for the last 30 years, 40 years. And the result is that we have a race to the bottom. He calls it the race to the bottom because everybody's trying to sell things the cheapest possible. And this is what he says. He says, essentially, that the white collar job is a myth now. The white collar jobs are actually just factory workers, and that with the invent of AI, they're actually getting replaced just as easily as factory workers when machines were built. So he says we're at a transition point in the entire market. And he says the only people that are going to be able to survive financially in this market is, well, I'll start here. He says we were all hunters, but then they invented farming and we became farmers. And we were all farmers, but then they invented the factory and we all became factory workers. Factory workers who followed instructions, supported the system, and got paid what they were worth. And then the factory fell apart. And what's left for us to work with? Art. Now, success means being an artist. In fact, history is now being written by the artists while the factory workers struggle. The future belongs to chefs, not to cooks or bottle washers. It's easy to buy a cookbook filled with instructions to follow, but it's really hard to find a chef book. So this entire book, I feel like I could read the entire thing. He is describing over and over and over, and he gives example after example about how we are economically struggling and in trouble because white collar workers aren't going to be making what they made in our parents' generation. And anybody who can follow instructions is not going to be able to command any kind of value in the marketplace. He even talked about a job that used to pay like $25 an hour for like typing out what's it called when you make captions. And he says now they've built that down. It's gotten so refined that you literally make like $1 a minute. So it's just not feasible for somebody to do that. And now AI's completely replaced it. So it's just not feasible. And so when I remind myself, if somebody asks me, but what about math? And what about STEM degrees? And what about this? I do still think STEM degrees are great, and my husband's an engineer, and he's a chemical engineer by degree. He's an electrical engineer by actual trade, I guess. But he tells me, and I thought it was really fascinating because I asked him, I said, do you have to use any kind of creativity in your work? And he says, oh yeah, that's why I am as successful as I am, because I have learned to be really, really creative. I have created formulas in Excel that are now standard procedure for multiple other employees. I've created systems and modes of working that have been really good processes that they've duplicated in other areas of the company. So he has been a creator. And it was that, not his engineering degree, that made him successful. In fact, even after he graduated with his degree in engineering, he couldn't find a job in engineering. It was a really slow hiring time in engineering. So for him, even a STEM degree wasn't the guarantee. And the difference between him and other engineers He's been able to outperform them and well, I don't know how to describe it. He's done very well for him in his career, and it is because he has built the capacity to be creative. So this is really what I want to talk about in this class. Number one, the fact that there is a need. There is a need for creative people. We aren't taught to think creatively in public schools. I know you know that, or you wouldn't have your kids at home. And we need that. But how do we do that? That is the major question. So as we talk over the next couple weeks, I'm going to talk about some tools I found. We're going to talk about just even the definition of creativity, because people talk about it with really, really different undertones and different meanings of what they're actually describing when they're discussing it. And so we have to kind of break it up. People use the word creativity to mean a lot of different things, and each of those different things requires a different process. So I just kind of want to break them. I just kind of want to break it apart and talk about what creativity really is in the next time we get together. And also talk about the value of beauty, which really enriches creativity, which I talked about a lot at our Simple Beauty conference. And then we'll talk about how to begin creating in a way that you want to create. So we'll talk about ways to do that in your homeschool with your parenting and your mothering and your kids and different personalities. Talk about Jordan Peterson, who talks about creativity. I've learned some interesting things from him, but I have a few like, not sure that really matches with what I've learned. So, and we'll talk about overcoming the obstacles to creativity, because there are many things like perfectionism, or just not feeling like you're particularly inspired that day, or worrying about like, well, you did really well in the past, but you're not doing as well now. So all of these things that get in the way of us being able to be effective creators, we'll talk about those too. So I'm going to end now so that we have time for any questions. And in fact, if I can't answer your questions right this minute, I'll write them down and I will weave them into the other presentations that I have planned. So let's open it up here. And for anybody who has any thoughts or questions or ideas that popped in to their head while we were talking today.
Well, while we're waiting for people to get brave and maybe raise their hand, I'll point you to the comments area where Kira said, when you were talking about trust and yielding, that it reminds her of her relationship, or us of our relationship with our children. If we want them to yield and to connect with what we want for them, we first have to build a relationship on a basic level, and trust has to be there. So true. So true. I think about, I did go to art school. I graduated in industrial design. I spent a lot of years unlearning what I learned in art school, because some of it just didn't make any sense to me. And I understand what they're saying now with more perspective, but in art school, we learned that children are not creative. And I was like, is that true? And so I had to go back to, I couldn't rely on what I learned in school when I became a parent. And I tell my husband all the time, like, of all the years of education that I had, nothing prepared me for parenting like training horses, because all of those principles apply. That was like the best well-educated heart education I ever could have gotten when I was a kid, was just working with animals and working with horses, because the principles that I had to learn if I wanted to stay alive on an 1,800-pound animal are all principles that I've used with my kids. And that is certainly the core, the foundation, the relationship. Can they trust me? Are they willing to yield to me? If not, why? And I need to be consistent with my structure and my training. And I have to, all the things that I've done as a mother. It's so applicable. Can you see that question from Aubrey? Oh, I love the picture of the horse in the background. Did you paint it? Actually, I'll be right back. Hold on just a second. I have to take the earplugs out to go grab it. While she's grabbing that, if you do have a question, you can either raise your hand or put it here in the comments. So this painting is one I did when I was in high school. And it was because of a verse in the Old Testament where we were encouraged to yield to Christ and to yield. And yielding was a really important word to me, because that was such a big word in the horse world. And so I have Christ's hand here, and this is the horse.
and he's yielding. So I imagine myself as a horse trying really, really hard to yield to God. So this is a really old painting done in acrylics, which I don't work in acrylics anymore, but I kept it around all these years. I finally got a frame for it. It's been in storage forever, and now I just need to finish it getting framed and on the wall. But I'm glad you saw that. I'll go to the back over here. I didn't intend for that to be in the background, by the way. Kind of serendipitous. Thanks, Aubrey.
Natalie, can you see that Kim's hand is raised?
Oh, no, I can't. How do I see raised hands?
Well, I can help you with it.
Okay, thanks.
What you're on, but Kim, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think something that you mentioned that really stood out to me is this idea that AI is kind of taking over, and so many of the ways that we've trained children in the past is to fall into a certain category. And right now we have STEM. And I just wonder, where do you see jobs in a general sense going forward? Because the creativity is so important for our children to be able to find their space in a very, very changing marketplace. We see it all the time with all the jobs of we need people to be able to come out of college and be able to think outside the box, not just answer the questions. But I'm just wondering, where do you see, how can we prepare our kids for such a, I don't know, volatile time for finding their place? And I just sometimes I wonder, I mean, I want to give them meaning in life. And Marlene's discussion of educating the mind, I feel it in myself. We were raised as scientists. And so softening my heart has been so hard and challenging. And I want more for my kids, but I also want to know that they're going to find a place in society and find a role. And so I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that. If that's making any sense. I feel like
Yes, it makes absolute sense. And that's really why I wanted to open the discussion about creativity. And I'm hoping that it will make more sense as we go through the next few weeks together, because there's so much to answer that question. One of the books that I was like gathering as I was thinking about all my notes was this. I don't know if you've ever read this, but it's called The Fourth Turning by Oliver DeMille recommended it. And I read it years ago and it was like way over my head. I couldn't even follow it. It's very, very heady and I'm totally ADD. So I had to like, what does that mean? But the basic message that I got from this book is that society goes through different cycles, and that there's kind of a spring when there's a new idea or a new something that has created something for society and everybody gets excited about it. And there's a big summer when they're harvesting everything, or maybe in the fall, I guess they harvest, but everything's growing and it looks really promising. And people start to feel really safe that the harvest is going to look good. And then in the fall, they're harvesting it in and it's all great. But he said there's also a season of winter. And when that winter comes, usually that idea has kind of lived its life and it's become so effective, so to speak, that they're not really sure what to plant in the next spring. And he said during the winter time, the people that do the best, the jobs, the sections of society that do the best are actually the business creators, because they're the only ones that are looking to the future of the next spring of what they're going to plant. So these are the creators. The ones that get us through the winter are the creators, the people that are creating new ideas, new businesses, new everything. But I don't think that necessarily means that all of our children need to be entrepreneurs. I think we're heading into that season when the entrepreneur is probably going to be better paid than somebody who is a pencil pusher and working a white collar job where somebody tells them what to do. But I still think there's a lot of room in every white collar job, especially STEM. I still think there's a lot of room for creativity to happen in those circumstances. So, and you'll have to forgive me, I feel like a little bit of an imposter syndrome here, even talking about this, because my kids are still young enough that they haven't gone into the work world. And we have our share of challenges and health issues and all the things. And so I'm not coming to you with like, hey, I know all of the answers, because I don't. I'm still trying to figure out every day how to help my children, just like probably most of you are. But some of you do have kids in college. And, you know, I read books like this skip college, which is kind of misleading. I wish they would retitle it, because I think they're just trying to get attention, like skip college, be crazy. And that actually isn't what the book says. They recognize that some degrees, like STEM, of any kind of medical field, any kind of legal field, like you have to have the degree, the credential, you have to. But all of the other fields, if I had it to do over again, industrial design, like I never would have gone to school for that. If you have a good portfolio, you can get a job. You don't need a degree. I'm an artist now. I sell paintings. And with the exception of maybe one time, nobody has ever asked me if I have a degree. Sometimes they're just curious, hey, did you go to art school? And I'm like, well, yeah, but I didn't learn anything from there. I learned everything from my mentor. Like I found a mentor. It was a blessing from God that I was able to do that. And the process of me becoming a painter had nothing to do with my education. And it's funny because I'll tell some people that and they'll argue me back. They'll say, well, surely you got something from your school. I'm like, no. I mean, did I have some good experience and make good friends? Did I, did I have some good memories? Of course, it's part of my story, it's part of who I am. But the actual knowledge that I took forward with me to become a painter, no, I didn't get any of that in school. In fact, I had to spend a long time unlearning what they taught me in school, things that were not true and that didn't make sense to me. Like all artists are messy. I'm not messy. I'm really orderly. So, just silly things that I just kind of had to reinvent after. So I didn't feel like my higher education actually taught me anything about becoming an artist at all. So there are a lot of jobs and there's actual need. I mean, I have a lot of people say, oh, well, starving artist, you'll never survive. But I have enough work to last me like the next 5 years. I can't take on any more work. I have people asking me if I'll take on work and I can't. I'm booked. So, there are people wanting what I have, but it's not because I can paint. It's because I offer a story. I offer basically well-educated heart with my paintings at the same time. So, and it's not even something I created. It's something that God is creating through me still. Like I'm still in the process of creating these projects and getting these paintings out. So it's a process of learning and growing, but He will provide the way. He absolutely does. And I know that if I tell my kids, like, if you want to be in a creative field, don't go to college, just don't. And I know that sounds super radical, but there's so much information coming out now. I have so many friends personally in my generation who got a college degree and couldn't get a job. They're working at Starbucks. They're everywhere. They have thousands and if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to go work at Starbucks. So we're heading into a new winter and the market is shifting. And I really, really believe what Seth Godin talked about, this linchpin idea. I really believe that the people that are going to make it, maybe their field requires college, maybe it doesn't, but regardless, the people that are going to make it are the people who have learned how to think creatively and solve real world problems, because they're not afraid of the problems. They're not afraid of the chaos that comes when we need new thinking. So I really do think that just the act of learning how to think creatively is the best thing that we can do to arm our children with the skills that they need to face a very, very, very big shift in the workplace. It's just not what it was when we were kids, and it's definitely not what it was when our parents were kids, telling us that you've got to get a college, and if you go to college, you'll for sure have a job. It just isn't that way anymore.
Natalie, one of the things that really resonates with me, especially as I've explored well-educated heart for 10 years now and kind of been with my children and moved them near adulthood. Some of them are adults, others are close, is that it's about shaping what it means to be human. What's this human factor versus this factory, AI can replace
efficiency.
What's human about us. But we need the heart and the mind working together to be human. And if we're empty humans, we're not going to be very successful. So, Kim and anybody else who's thinking about those kind of questions, I think shape the human in us, and then God will show us how to use that. And I'll quickly illustrate that by a man in my neighborhood who creates prosthetics for people. He is so gifted. I am in awe at the things that he does. but he's an artist who has found a way to create these prosthetics, and he is full of heart because, you know, these are people who've lost parts of their face or their eye or different things, and he's giving them this piece back. And it's a beautiful marriage of heart and mind, of you know, being human and science, and bringing it all together in a creative way.
Absolutely. And I feel like I never could have made the step into being an artist if I hadn't been convinced in my heart first that it was a good thing to do. And I actually had to go through a logical study in order to, I think I knew in my heart it was a good thing to do because I had done it since I was a child and it was so fulfilling, but I had stopped doing it because I believed it didn't have any practical value. And boy, that idea of practicality, we'll talk about that a lot next week, because the practical, and there's a line, I don't know if all of you have heard, but it was fed to me in design school over and over and over: form follows function, form follows function, form follows function. And that line didn't exist until the 1920s, when they switched architecture to really, really modern, to eliminating anything aesthetically beautiful or interesting or anything. They were just bare bones. We're just going to provide buildings for people because they need a place to live. And boy, we made a mistake. We made a mistake in that era, and we're still struggling with it, I think. So let me just read the comments here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yes, the fourth turning is worth a read. It'll bend your brain. And Jennifer, you said that confidence that comes in yielding to the Lord and knowing he's guiding us this direction is so helpful to me not to worry about the future most of the time. I'm glad you're still human, Jennifer. I read that. I'm like, oh, I still worry about the future sometimes. But it's true, because really, honestly, if you think about that analogy of the horse, they have absolutely no idea what they're creating with the dance. They have no idea the beginning from the end. All they know is that they're just trying to yield, and they just get one instruction at a time, really repetitive until they get it right. And then they get the next one and the next one and the next one. And they have no idea what the Lord is creating with them. And that video I showed, you can look it up on YouTube. It is in the Olympics, but it's called freestyle dressage. And they do it to music, but they actually choreograph the music to the horse's gait. So the horse's natural gait goes along with the music. It's not like you're making the horse step at the exact on the beat. So it takes a little bit of the magic out knowing that, but it is really amazing. And the horse still has no idea. In fact, you can't train the horse with the music, because if you do, the horse will begin to anticipate what movement comes next, and they'll do it too early. So you almost have to keep the horse blind of the official final test, because if you let him know what it is, then he'll try and guess and he'll move too early. So that's totally typical of me, right? I don't know about you, but I would definitely jump the gun if I knew the end from the beginning. And just learning to yield is such an essential part of the creative process. Sarah says, my husband loves to listen to business books. What would be your top books to help share well-educated heart creativity messages in the ways of business books? Okay, so definitely Linchpin, definitely. This one is one of my favorites. It's called Quiet by Susan Cain. It is so good. Daniel H. Pink, A Whole New Mind. This whole book is like, our market is dying. We need creators. This is a really good book. Outliers is, a lot of people have read that. He doesn't necessarily talk about the importance of artists, but I really do like that he talks about the importance of practice really in that one, but there are some good gems in there. And this one is actually one of my favorites too, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So this one totally changed the way my husband does like just even thought about investing and everything, the way he thought about his job and retirement. Because this is just so countercultural and so counter normal. This is one that he's really cynical, so I'll give you a heads up. He has a few things that he's really cynical about, but education is one of them, so you'll probably agree with him on all of those. And he is so well read. He is a well-educated heart guy to the core. He quotes from French, he quotes from Italian, he quotes from Arabic sources. He's always looking to different spiritual leaders. It's really, really fascinating book. He's a well-educated guy for sure. He's read all the classics and has learned from all of them and shares a lot of wisdom, that a lot of tidbits that really took me by surprise. So yeah, I would say those ones are probably my very favorites, but this one's really good too. Where did it go? This one is not a business book, but it's by Elder Bednar, Increase in Learning. And this just has a lot of well-educated heart principles. There was one quote I was going to share with you today. He says, our individual responsibility is to learn what we should learn and live as we know we should live and become what the master would have us become. That's the process of learning, that dance, that is the whole purpose of education and the responsibility of it. So I don't know if that answers your question. I could probably give you more, but I gathered a few of these. This one, I got some really good stuff out. It's called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. That one was really interesting, but that probably isn't, it's less about artists than it is about and creativity needed in the workplace and more just about how one little thing can make a huge difference. But a lot of times it's that really, you kind of have to read creativity between the lines, because it's like somebody thinking of a new creative solution and just a little tiny itty bitty switch just totally changes everything. So it does support the basic idea, but you have to read it a little bit behind the lines. It's not quite as direct.
Quite a few comments on that was a very comprehensive list of books, and people would appreciate maybe typing in the comments of this later.
Sure. I can do that.
Even a photograph of things. Also, Chalet Tippett just agreed with you. She loved your thoughts on being practical. I found myself also not doing art anymore because I've kept telling myself it's not practical or it doesn't have a purpose. And if it doesn't, then I shouldn't waste my time doing it.
Oh my goodness. Are we ever going to talk about that in the next few meetings? I could get on a whole soapbox about practicality. It's going to be fun.
Well, we have hit the 1 hour mark. So I am
my goodness.
We might want to wrap up. If someone has one last question, I think we have 1 minute to kind of address that. But also Natalie will be back and we're excited.
Yeah, and I'll write all those books in the post of where, just in the comments of the meeting recording. How's that sound? And then you can go back and look there anytime.
That sounds great. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us today and for being here. And we're excited to continue learning more about creativity and how it lies in us and how we can use it for good, and how it mixes with heart and mind. That's what Marlene teaches, heart and mind. Yeah. And that's that burst of light and inspiration. Natalie, thank you for sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Marley.
We're excited to have you come back.
Thanks everyone for coming. It was good to see you.